Rod Day, welcome to Over the Bonnet.
Thanks, Mark.
You're not far away from retirement, looking back at 40 years as a general practitioner. What's the thing that stands out to you?
Well, it's sort of 40 years in Gympie, and but I was working for a few years prior to that in Biggendon. The thing that stands out, I think, is that it's gone so fast, and when I've started to sort of think back now because of coming to the end, and it doesn't seem like it's been all that long at all. But when you think back and you go back to the time when I started and when I just when we were married, and that I realise a lot of time's gone by because in that time we've had our family and the like. But medicine's you go to work each day and. Before long, a year's gone by, and then before long that, a decade's gone by. So, but the thing that stands out is that I've enjoyed it immensely the whole time.
Is it the people?
It's definitely the people. Yeah, the people, the environment. I like working with our group of staff and the nurses and the other doctors. So that's been important as well. So it is the people.
Is it hard to be finally pulling the bails and ending your career and walking away from it?
It was something I struggled with for probably a number of years, and I realised it was a time to sort of change my direction because I was finding that the hours were sort of getting to me a little bit. So I started thinking about it about a couple of years ago, and then as it's come closer, I've sort of said, well, when do I do this? When do I pull the plug? When I finally decided and then announced it to people, I've relaxed into that. And now I'm actually quite looking forward to the idea of life after medicine.
So what does that bring you?
Life after medicine?
Absolutely.
A little bit of uncertainty, Mark, because the thing about medicine, especially when I started, is that it wasn't just a career; it was sort of a lifestyle. So I mean, the last 45 years has really been medicine almost exclusively. So what I'm looking forward to is freedom to actually decide what other things I can do. I do have certain interests that I'm keen to pursue. Get back to some of the bushwalking and some kayaking and things that I really enjoy, and a lot of other adventurous activities. And I'm looking forward to spending more time with our grandchildren. Seeing I didn't spend a lot of time with our children as they were growing up, but I'll hopefully be able to invest more time with our grandchildren.
Do you think they missed out?
I have a wife who is more than compensates for me. She's enabled our children to sort of grow up in an environment that where if I'm not around, they've still been very looked after. So I often feel sort of pangs of guilt that I wasn't around. I didn't ever go to any of their sporting activities or things. Whenever something came up, I was often called in and so missed out on a lot of their activities. So there's sort of feelings of guilt about that. But they're all pretty happy, balanced kids now, and so I'm happy. And they're growing their families and I'm able to enjoy interacting with them through their families now. So I'm getting a second chance, Mark.
So you talk about the kayaking and bushwalking.
Yeah.
What are some of the memorable experiences you've had as an outdoors person?
Well, I think it's part of sort of the compensating for the intensity of medicine is that I sort of took an interest in bushwalking fairly early when I came to Gympie, and had a few mates in town, and we've sort of been walking together for the last 25, 30 years. And so it sort of developed from walking around in this area. We gave ourselves the task of climbing all the local mountains around here, and including that mountain behind you here, Mount Glastonbury. And from there we thought, well, let's go and try something a bit different. And so we went to Tasmania and did the overland track, And then we thought, that was pretty good. And well, let's see if we can do some other things. So we went to Nepal and walked to close to base camp. And
how was that?
That was uniquely different because it's a cultural difference as well. So it was not just the walking and the climbing, but it was the cultural differences, and it was great. It was one of those life memories, which I'll always cherish. And so we did that with the four of us, the four walking guys, and that was memorable. And since that time, we've done a lot of other walks in New Zealand and Tasmania and the like. So quite a multitude, and it's the sort of thing I think that kept my sanity throughout the time. I probably didn't help my wife's sanity when I left her with our 4 children or 3 children, however many it was at the time when I left. But it was the thing that kept me able to sort of escape people for a while and just enjoy the wilderness. I think the thing that attracts me to walking is the remoteness, the wilderness, and you'll usually find that my walking spots are spots where there's very few people or no people, wilderness of Tasmania or wilderness of New Zealand or the like, or South America.
Talk about South America. What did you do there?
Went over to South America and we visited the national parks with my wife, and I did a lot of the walks while she stayed at home and read some books. But there's some great walks in the Fitzroy National Park and the Del Paine National Park that are spectacular walks.
What sets them apart?
I think again it's the remoteness and the different scenery. Their iconic features. The pillars. Of Del Paine National Park, and being able to walk to the base of them and the like is just uniquely different from what we're used to around here, and it's different from Nepal, and it's different from Tasmania, and it's different from New Zealand. It's just encompasses our world. It's very different in different places.
Do you tend to stick to the more mountainous areas when you're walking, or are you looking for just views? What is the sort of thing that draws you to a walking trail?
My other passion, apart from walking, is photography. So it's usually remote places and as a rule mountains. Yeah, so it's got to have a mountain, and my wife always sort of jokes that we can't drive past a mountain without me wanting to be on top of it, and it's very true. There's something about being on top of a mountain. The world looks different. What's
the attraction to stand on top of the mountain? What's the feeling?
I think it's just the challenge of doing it. So when you get to the top, you feel as if you've accomplished something, and of course there's usually a couple of good photo shots as well. But as a rule, a lot of the photo shots are on the way up the top, but it's the accomplishment. It's feeling that you've actually conquered something.
When you have conquered, you've still got to go down there.
Yes, that's right, and that's quite enjoyable in different ways as well. But yes, it's usually you aim to get to the top. Then getting home again is sort of, okay, I better get going. But it's the climb to the top is certainly the ultimate experience.
And the unwind is the walk back down, I suppose.
That's right, yes. Yeah.
You talk about the freedom that you've got now.
Yep.
Were you not free? Were you too bound, do you think, by what you'd chosen in your particular career?
I never felt that way until probably, the last couple of years. I felt that it was something that I was called to do or that I wanted to do, and so I committed myself to that. And as I said, when I started medicine, it wasn't just a career; it was a lifestyle, because we started very early. When I first came to Gympie in '81, we started very early in the morning because we had to do anaesthetics or operative procedures, and we'd say start at 6 and we'd finish at 9 o'clock at night, and that was a standard sort of day. And then in between, then after 9 o'clock you're on call, and we did obstetrics in those days, so you'd possibly be called out to deliver a baby in the middle of the night. So it was very much, it was your life. So
they're big days though. How did you cope?
I've been fortunate that I seem to need little sleep, and I don't get super tired, so that's been good. I think that came from many years of slogging at the textbooks, where you finish your study at 2 o'clock in the morning and sort of get up to go to lectures next morning. I think I got used to that. I still find that I rarely go to bed before midnight because I just don't feel necessarily tired. So I'm fortunate in that respect, and I think that medicine makes that happen as well. But disturbed sleep is something that I found easier to put up with probably in the early years, not so much these days.
You talk about when you were doing procedural medicine back in the day. How has it changed over the 40 years that you've seen and experienced?
Yeah, well, it's changed significantly. It's probably one of the disappointments of medicine in over the last 40 years for me is just seeing the decline of the procedural stuff that we as GPs used to be able to do. So initially when I came to Gympie, there were nine doctors. I became the 9th doctor in Gympie, and we looked after most of the patients. There were hospital doctors. There were 2 hospital doctors, and they looked after the public patients, but a huge percentage of our patients were, did have private cover, and so we had 2 theatre sessions a week in our practice alone, and where we did, simple things, tonsillectomies and gallbladders and things. We had a surgeon in our team, gallbladders, and we did the Caesars and the surgery. That
it's pretty full on.
It was full on, and of course we had to do the anaesthetics as well. There was no anaesthetists in town, and we did the anaesthetics for the hospital, a lot of the hospital cases as well. So there was a very big interaction between the hospital, the public hospital, and the private guys, and we did a lot of the procedures in our rooms that now get done by the radiology practices.
What sort of stuff?
We used to do all of the joint injections and the shoulder injections and the like. There wasn't the option of having them done by the radiology group, so we did them, and that was, we got a small fee for that. I think now they're all referred to the radiology group, and of course they get a much bigger fee for that.
Why the difference?
Again, I think it's the expertise that's expected that specialists have that expertise, and of course they have the imaging. They need to do the imaging. There's a cost to that, and there's a cost then to doing the procedure. So it's a much more expensive exercise for Medicare. And the sad thing is that the GPs have lost that skill. I used to teach that skill to my registrars. I don't teach that anymore because our doctors don't do those skills anymore. So procedural medicine is certainly not done so much now by GPs, and that's sad, because I think the doctors today are missing out on the enjoyment of doing the procedural sort of stuff and doing a lot of the things. The same with the fractures. We used to do all of the fractures in our clinic. We had an X-ray machine. We would do the anaesthetics. We had an anaesthetic machine in our rooms, and we would give a quick anaesthetic to set a fracture. Nowadays, the fractures go straight to the hospital, and we rarely see them first off. They just go straight to the hospital. So it's different, and I think, as I said, I've been fortunate to have practiced medicine at that time, and I think some of the doctors these days are missing out on that, although there is a tendency now to want to start retraining general practitioners to be more focused on certain procedural stuff. But again, it's either they'll follow a path of obstetrics, or they'll follow a path of anaesthetics, or they'll follow a path of paediatrics. So they're still super sort of semi-specialised.
It's a bit of an interesting call that it's doing full circle now that they're back training to do procedural medicine. Yes. When it seems to have died out to a large degree.
Yes.
Do you think that it's going to come back to where you were in the old days?
No, I don't think it'll ever happen like that again. Certainly not in the bigger centres like in the major cities and even in Gympie. But obviously in a place like Longreach or Winton, you need doctors who can do all those sorts of things. So I think that's where the procedural sort of skills will be honed. So the doctors will do that. And I think in these remote areas, the doctors still do a lot of those sort of procedures because they have to. There's no other option. And I mean, I think a lot of my experience also came from the fact that my first couple of years of medicine, I was the sole practitioner in a little country town, and I was the only one there, and so I had to do all of those things. And you do that, you get confident in doing that, and that it was certainly my my grounds for sort of the skills that I acquired.
Talk about those days out in the country when you were the only doctor. Were you relying on the training, or was it on the job learning?
It was a bit of both, because I acquired a state, what they call the state scholarship back then, when I was going through university to help pay for my my education, and that meant that I was bonded to the government, so that when I finished my first year in a hospital, I was then expected to go to a small community and look after that community. So we knew that, and so though we were given some extra training when in our first year residency after leaving medical school. So I made sure that I did plenty of obstetrics, and I did plenty of anaesthetics, and I did a few operations, appendectomies and things like that, so that I was ready for that. So I went out there with a reasonable sort of skill or knowledge, but certainly nothing ever prepares you for at the time when suddenly you've got an accident and you're the only one there, and you've got to sort of do these procedures. We had some adjoining towns where there were doctors. The closest one was an hour away, and so if I needed an anaesthetic, I would ring him up and he'd come over and do the anaesthetic while I did the procedure, and vice versa. I went over and did his anaesthetics there. So that was an experience in itself. Quick trips to to the neighbouring town. I had a little Datsun 1600 at the time, and that was my first car, and I still had that, and I sort of felt that it couldn't quite go fast enough. So so I splashed out and bought a big V8 Ford station wagon. Much to my wife's amusement, and I think I bought it the week before we were to be married, so I don't think that went over very well either. We were out looking for cars instead of doing the other things that we should have been doing. But it was nice driving this nice powerful car over to do this. I used to look forward to having to go to do anaesthetics in the neighbouring town.
Are you a car guy?
No, I'm not, and that's the thing. That's the first time I sort of, really, went out and, bought a more expensive or a more powerful car. No, cars don't mean a great deal to me. They get me from point A to point B, and that's it. But further on that Datsun 1600, which, as I said, was my first car, I bought it while I was a student. For $2,225, I remember.
Must have been a fair bit of money in those days, though.
Well, it was, and I could afford the $1,000, and Mum and Dad gave me the loan for the rest, which I paid off with my Christmas job while I was studying. But that Datsun 1600 travelled with me through my student years, and I had it here in Gympie. Out there at Biggin, and I had it when I came to Gympie. But I remember one of my patients came and said to me one day, he said, "Look, Doc," he said, "you've got to get rid of that car of yours and get a decent car." He said, "I can't, when you drive past, I can't say, 'Look, that's my doctor.'" when you're driving that car. So soon after that it did die, and I had to buy a different car. But no, cars haven't meant a great deal to me, really.
Back to the early days in medicine, what first got you the motivation to become a doctor in the first place?
It started in grade 4.
Wow.
When I went to the doctor, and I know this because I can remember the situation where Mum took me to the doctor, and I was sitting in the waiting room, and I think I must have just been overwhelmed by something. I'm not sure why I said to her, I asked her a few questions, and I said, Mum, I think I want to be a doctor.
This is at 4?
Grade 4.
Grade 4.
Grade 4, no, I was 9 years old.
Right. It's still fairly early to have that sort of epiphany.
Yeah, and I've thought about that sometimes as to why that came. I mean, I'd like to think because, I was brought up in a Christian family that it was, I had a desire to, choose a caring profession. But I think if I think about it, it was just something that came to me while I was sitting in there thinking, I like this place, I like the smell, I like the activity. I think I'd like to be part of that. And I didn't change my direction or mind from that moment on.
What was your parents' reaction at the time?
I think that they would have sort of said like
any
parents, that's right, so not a fireman, they would have just sort of taken it with a grain of salt, but I didn't change my mind, and I'm very glad I didn't. It was the thing that drove me to work hard at school. I remember high school was for me was very focused on getting good results, because I knew that to get into medicine I would have to get good results and good marks, and because medicine was still one that was a little bit harder to get into, so I worked very hard for it, and got there.
If you didn't become a doctor, what would you have done? Was there any fallback?
Back when I did my final at high school, we did the old senior exam, and you had to choose 3 options, choice for careers. I wanted to go to university, and I had to choose 3. So medicine was my first. My second choice was scientist, working in laboratory, and my third choice was science teaching. So I remember putting those 3 down. As it was, I was fortunate I got a Commonwealth scholarship from my senior results, and that gave me the option of choosing any course at university that I wanted. So I was able to get into medicine, my first choice, so I didn't ever have to explore those other options.
Can you remember the feeling when you finally got accepted to study medicine at university?
Yeah, I can. It was overwhelming because it was my dream, and I worked very hard for it. I was often referred to as a bit nerdish because I was never seen away from the textbooks and the like. So I accomplished, what I'd really been working towards. So it was a great relief, but it was a great moment in my life.
General practice as opposed to specialty medicine. Was there a reason that you decided on general practice? Was it open all the way through, or you're always going to become a GP?
No, I wasn't. I didn't really give my choice a great deal of thought. I just wanted to do medicine, and then of course I got sent out into the country, and I was thinking seriously of specialising in paediatrics, and but the longer I spent out in the country, the harder it would have been to get back into the hospital situation, because you'd have to do your paediatrics through the it's hospital based, and I would have had to go and get a training back in the hospitals, and out in the country and doing all the general medicine that I was, I couldn't see myself going back into hospital practice. General practice became my choice, and I've never regretted that. In actual fact, I'm very glad that I didn't choose paediatrics because I felt, that would have narrowed me down. The things that I've done in general practice have been far in excess of what I could do probably in paediatrics. So I've had no regrets about choosing the general practice pathway, and if I did medicine again, that's what I would choose.
With the doctors these days, you say they're not getting the sort of training that you did. Are they as good as the GPs and doctors and clinicians that were around, say, 40 years ago?
Yeah, look, I'm sure it's like any profession. You've got your good and your bad, and look, their training is good, and the doctors are in general, to get through medicine these days, you've got to know your stuff, and you've got to do well. And there's a lot of extra training once you've done your medicine now in general practice or in any specialty that you choose. So yes, they are, but I think that the expectations on doctors now, it's different. There's different requirements. There's a lot more regulation. There's a lot more paperwork. There's a lot more accountability than that there ever was in the past, which means it's a more arduous sort of task sometimes. Writing notes about everything. I think that back, in our early days, notes were very much a secondary thing. Nowadays, of course, it's vital that we have very good records and keep very good notes. But it does take a lot of time, and so, it's a different practice of medicine.
What is the biggest thing that you've found hardest to adapt to as you've seen the evolution of medicine during your 40 years? Is it that note-taking?
Yeah, look, I think that's the part that gets harder for me to take. In the last few years, I've noticed that everybody wants their their written documents on this. Everyone comes in with their forms to be completed, and there's a lot of that now. There's certain plans you've got to do before you can refer someone to an allied health person, and that. So there's a lot of stuff that I don't regard as being necessarily pure medicine or as relevant as perhaps it needs to be. I think it's accountability, and that's the thing that's probably the hardest to sort of to adapt to and get used to, especially when I practiced at a time when that just wasn't required. Medicine was a lot simpler in many respects. It's a lot more complex now in many respects.
That's an interesting thought. When you say you're doing operations and procedural medicine, you say it's more complex now. I probably would have been steering the other way.
I think the complexities, not just in what we do, it's in how we do it now. It's expectations. If you back when I started, CT scans were only in major hospitals, and I probably would have ordered a CT scan once or twice a year. Now, a week wouldn't go by when I wouldn't order a CT scan. It's the availability of all of these extra services. We've got MRI scanning now, which is another level of scanning. Medicine is very much more advanced. It's more complex, and there's a lot more to know. And I think when I say it was simpler, I think it was. There weren't as many options, and so therefore, you had very simple pathway. Nowadays, there's a lot to know, and it's changing. It's just changing every day. New drugs, new ways of treating cancer. We're seeing, cancer treatments now changing the whole direction of cancer. People are surviving cancers that they wouldn't have survived back when I started. So the advances are more complex, but they're getting better results. But people are expecting that those services will be available for them, but they cost money, and I think our health budget is going to be stressed for life.
That's an interesting thing. The cost of medicine these days, it is really starting to balloon out. Is there something that you think should be done about that?
Well, yeah, I certainly am not one to sort of give that advice or the like. I'll leave that to the accountants and the experts. But so I wouldn't know where to start.
Are we
actually,
too
Mark.
Americanised these days with the fact that you do need private health insurance, but there's still big gaps and people are still having to dip into their pocket?
I think that medicine in Australia is probably some of the best in the world. I think that medicine and top medicine's available to every member of our community, whether you have private cover or not. If you don't have private cover, the public system is extremely good. It might take a little bit longer, but it's extremely good. And so we're very fortunate. I've heard reports of the NHS system in the UK sort of struggling, and we all know that the system in America isn't really working very well for a lot of the community. So Australia, we're still the fortunate country, definitely with medicine.
What excites you about medicine these days? Because it has changed and it is evolving. What area of medicine do you say, wow, that's really good that they're doing X, Y or Z?
I think a few things that have changed medicine is immunisation. Immunisation has resulted in a lot of our communicable diseases being brought under control and no longer part of it. Measles, diphtheria.
Were you seeing a lot of that in the early days?
I used to see a bit of measles and mumps and the like. I haven't seen that now for many years. Mind you, there's still occasional outbreaks of measles and chickenpox, but back in my early days, chickenpox was just the disease that everybody had, all the kids got, and you have parties where if someone's got chickenpox, everyone goes there so that the kids get it over and done with quickly. Of course, that's past history, and it's not acceptable sort of medicine these days. So immunisation has definitely changed things. The other thing that I think is where I've seen the biggest change is the treatments for cancers. The new monoclonal antibody treatments for cancer therapy and radiotherapy, of course, has changed things dramatically. Better surgical techniques. It's certainly evolving at a very rapid rate, and that's probably the biggest changes that I've seen.
Well, there's been a big change in the last 12 months or so, of course, with COVID.
Yes.
How have you experienced that, and how do you see it unfolding?
Well, it certainly has affected all of us, hasn't it? COVID. It's changed the way we do things, the way we interact, and the like. Personally, living in Gympie, I think Gympie hasn't been impacted greatly. We've had a few cases of COVID. Most of them have been contained very quickly, and so we haven't had the real concern. So I think there's been a certain relaxed feeling about COVID in Gympie. As far as our practice is concerned, I did practice from home for 4 or 5 weeks. Just doing phone consultations. The government enabled us as GPs to do phone consultations and be remunerated for that.
Finally getting paid for all the phone calls.
Correct, yes. And the big question is, will that stay, or will they sort of close that option down? It's been very handy for a lot of people, but so that had impact, not working at the surgery. But I think a lot of people have found that COVID has enabled them to stop and reevaluate things and slow down, because they've had to. A lot of working from home, a lot of things. They can't go out to restaurants. They can't, go out to a lot of sporting groups and things like that. So they've had to have more time at home, and they've sort of things have slowed down, and they've sort of refocused and the like. So, I think that's what I've certainly seen happen. Where we go from here, well, we certainly seem like we're normalising a little bit more now with borders opening up just as recently as the last couple of days, and so we're going to see Australia return to a sense of normality. Although COVID is with us for a long time, immunisation is being heralded as being the thing that's going to save us all, and I'm sure it will be very beneficial, but I think that's going to take a long time for that to infiltrate the community and give us the protection that we need. And I mean, we don't know how successful the immunisation is going to be.
Do you think they're rushing it through?
I think they have to rush it through. I think that's essential. If they're going to do it, the sooner the better. And that's the other thing that has advanced with is, as I said, immunisation technology is just astounding now. And so they've been able to do that because of the background immunisation work that they've been doing. So I think it had to be rushed through, and I think it still needs to be pushed through as rapidly as we can, because there's a lot of people being affected, a lot of people dying that we can turn around.
What if they get it wrong by rushing it though?
I suppose we won't really know that until the aftermath. But it's fairly rigorous requirements before they can bring it out into the community. They have to pass some very rigorous testing and approval before it's allowed out. So I don't see it being allowed out before it's, one, safe, and two, offers reliable protection. The question will be not whether it's safe, but the question will be, how long does it give us protection that we need? Do we have to repeat this injection once, twice, every 12 months? Like a flu needle, boosters, they're the unknowns. But safety-wise, it will not be rolled out without it being totally safe. So I think that the community should not be worried about that.
Are you having a sigh of relief in some ways that you are getting out of medicine when you are because of this COVID situation?
Probably not so much because of COVID, but there's a lot of changes, in medicine that, are coming forth, and I think, okay, I won't be part of that. That's good, because all these changes that come require commitment. They require, because when in general practice we're part of a practice and part of a business, and so there's usually a lot of changes that have to occur when new things come in, a lot of new learning and the like. So it's going to be nice to actually be able to, as I said right at the start, to be free to actually not necessarily have to commit to that, but leave that to my colleagues, and be free to go and do some other things. Might be a bit of a selfish sort of approach, but it's time to do that.
You've probably earned it. Now, coming back to Gympie after growing up here, how were you received when you first came back here?
It's a very interesting question. That I'd been in Gympie. We came to Gympie when my parents moved here from Nambour when I was 9 years. That was that year that I went to see my doctor.
It was a pretty big year.
Yes, it was. We came back to Gympie halfway through the year, and it was that second half of the year that I went to see the doctor and decided medicine was the way to go. But so I was in Gympie from the age of 9, and so I did most of my primary school here at Central School. I did all of my high school at Gympie High, and then I went away to uni for the 6 years, and then I worked at Biggin at Bundaberg for 12 months, and then Biggin as the medical superintendent with private practice out there for 2 years. Then I had the situation of deciding what I was going to do, because I'd finished my term of bonding to the government. I was invited back to Gympie by my GP, Dr. Green, to join their practice.
Was he the one that you experienced the smells, the whole wanting to become a doctor?
No, it wasn't. It was actually a different practice. But we did change to Dr. Green sometime after that, and so he was my ongoing GP during my teenage years. So he had invited me back to join the practice. At that stage, it was Doctors Green, Walker, and Bryce, and so I, had the option of coming back there, or I had the option of just going out and doing, working anywhere in general practice. I was married at that stage, and we contemplated which was the best way, because coming back to Gympie, I was known in Gympie, I'd done all my schooling here, and so I thought, well, what are people going to think about, this young fella coming back and being their doctor. And so I was really quite apprehensive about that.
So it made it harder.
It did make it harder. So we really contemplated, starting up a practice in Tenham Sands. At that stage, it was a new development just south of Gladstone, and it was brand new. They had no doctor, so I was going to go up and be the GP there. So we toyed with that, but then we thought our parents live in Gympie. It's closer to Brisbane. It's all the things that we need. So we'll give Gympie a try, and now that's sort of history. But it was the right decision. I was very well received coming back to Gympie. There were no problems. A lot of my patients have been, kids that I grew up with, and so the privilege of looking after them and their families and things like that has been there, and it didn't detract in any way from my ability to be accepted in the community.
Was there an awkwardness that when you're examining or treating someone that you knew from either side, from you or from them?
No, I don't think so. I think that's sort of the skills we learn as well, how to sort of relate to people no matter what the situation. And so no, I never found it uncomfortable. I can't probably speak for my patients, but I would think that they probably found it okay as well. They kept coming back anyway, so they probably did. So no, I was pleasantly surprised that it was it ended up being the right decision.
What's the thing that stands out, either procedural or something that you've done in general practice that you just go, yeah, I did that really well?
The good thing about being in Gympie and in a group practice is that you've got colleagues around you, and so therefore if you have some doubts about something, you run it past them. That's the beauty of having colleagues. And so they say, look, I think that's the right way, or this is the way I do it. I'll give you a hand to do that, or something like that. That's invaluable. I think probably the most memorable experiences I had were when I was by myself in Biggenden, because you are by yourself. And I still remember a snake bite coming in, a young child. I think they were about 7 or 8. And they weren't able to identify the snake, but so they started having symptoms, and you don't have all of the testing, blood test availability in a small town, so you've got to sort of send it off to Bundaberg, which is an hour and a half away, and the like. So you had to watch for symptoms, and this child started deteriorating. So I gave them the polyvalent antivenin, snakebite antivenin, and which covers all of the snake bites and that. But then they developed an anaphylactic reaction to this vaccine, so to the antivenin. So it required me to then administer adrenaline. So I remember sitting up with this child, giving small increments of adrenaline right through the night. I sat beside the bed for probably 12 hours, just keeping this child alive. They did survive, and were very grateful. I used to get a Christmas card from them every year. So those sort of things, which are some of the most worrying times in my life. But again, it's a bit like climbing the top of a mountain. You get there, and it's just elation. It's a feeling of accomplishment and the like. So, and there are a number of those events where basically you did have a part in conserving someone's life.
And that's pretty powerful.
It is. It's powerful, and it's rewarding. And I've always found medicine to be, I get a lot more out of it than I'm sure my patients do. It's just the fact that you are able to make a change and a difference to a lot of people's lives, and it's a privileged position to be included in people's lives and to be accepted and respected in that sort of that area. So that's the things that I treasure the most, is the relationships I've had with my patients, the privilege of being part of their life and their family. And I think the 40 years, being in one place for 40 years, you get the opportunity to have been part of their life for 2 or 3 generations, really, over that 40 years. You've delivered them, and then you look after their children and so on. So and their extended family. It's a very privileged position, and that's the thing that I feel blessed about, having practiced for this long in a small country town, basically.
Must be a really satisfying feeling to deliver someone and then watch them have their family, and you're a part of the growth of that family.
It is. It's as I said, a privileged position, and very rewarding. So, I think I chose a career that for not so sure what reason, but I'm very glad I did. It's an opportunity to to use your skills, but it's an opportunity to relate to people, and I think I've enjoyed that relationship aspect the most.
We were talking about learning. Do you still refer back to medical school? Has it given you your 6 years of your life, as you said? Do you still go, yep, that's something I remembered from medical school?
I think medical school learning has probably faded quite a lot. It's really the learning that's continuing that I probably have learnt most from. Continuing medical education is, of course, critical in medicine, and I've always enjoyed that aspect. I enjoy going to conferences. I enjoy learning about new things in medicine, and that's another thing that I had to come to terms with when giving up medicine, is just, okay, do I stop sort of learning about medicine? And in some respects, that's going to happen by default. I would like to think that I still keep up with some things that are happening in medicine, because it's still a passion and interest that I have. Medical school has probably faded away, and a lot of the stuff we learn at medical school has changed so dramatically that it just shows how vital it is to actually keep up to date.
This continuing education, how important is it? Is it something that is more important these days for the changes with what's happening in medicine, or less important?
No, it is more important. It's critical, and I think that we are required to do that as part of our registration. But I think that it's those requirements are fairly straightforward. I think that anyone who really wants to keep up with medicine has got to really be very focused on learning, continuing learning. And that's what keeps the mind active as well, which is very important. So
will you keep studying? Will you keep your mind active?
I have to. It's proven that if we keep our mind active and the like, we'll keep our mind working for longer. So I hope to. And as I said, I hope that a lot of that's medicine, but I'm hoping that I can read things that are not necessarily medical journals. For instance, I haven't spent much time reading other books, reading fiction and the like, because I always feel guilty if I pick up a fiction book. I think no, I really should be reading that journal. So I've always felt guilty. So I think the idea of sitting down, having a bit of time to read other literature and other things is probably an attraction as well.
It must be an interesting mindset then to move to, where you're not having to continually keep yourself updated and you can look at different things. Yeah. Is there a sense of guilt when you're walking into that?
I don't think so. I think there's a sense of relief more. I certainly, I think I can put that guilt sort of feeling about reading away, because I know that I won't necessarily be having to use that knowledge for to treat patients. So there's that sense of freedom, and probably a sense of relief in many respects as well, that I can actually let some of that go.
Back in the early days when you were so procedural and you were so hands-on, what was it like the first time? Do you remember the first time you put knife to skin, and like the snake bite? You hadn't experienced it before. Yep. How did that work for you?
Well, it's a very interesting situation there, because as I said, when I was doing procedures in Biggenden, and we had a theatre there. This child came in with actually was a child, no, it was an adult, came in with appendicitis, what I diagnosed as appendicitis, and so I rang up Henry Young, the doctor from Gayndah, and said, Henry, I need an anaesthetic. I got to take this appendix out, and so this was the first appendix I had done by myself. Okay, I'd assisted in appendix, and but I'd never done one myself. I'd always been the assistant. So he came over and gave the anaesthetic, and I opened up, and it wasn't a straightforward appendix. It was actually what we call a retrocecal appendix. It was actually behind and attached to the back of the bowel. So I was very fortunate that that Henry Young, the anaesthetist guy, had been in general practice in Gayndah for about 20 years. He was very experienced, and so he actually helped me through it. He said, do this and do that, and so he was giving the anaesthetic, but also assisting me with the procedure. So I was very grateful for his help. So my first appendix was very challenging. The other ones after that were a little bit easier, but that's the first time I put knife to skin, as you asked, and that was a bit of a scary moment. But again, survived and did well, and I learned a lot from it.
Scary moments. Have you had many of them?
There's always scary moments in medicine. Probably my scariest moments were obstetrics.
What happened there?
Oh, I think there's always that unknown. 90% of obstetrics is straightforward and goes without problems, but that 10% that are the things that sort of age you very quickly. Where things can go very bad very quickly for mum and bub, and you've just got to react very quickly. This was more of an issue in Biggin because I was doing obstetrics by myself there, so there was no one to assist me. So you just had to hope that things went straightforward. And again, everybody survived. It's nice when I came to Gympie, I had people to help. There's always somewhere you could ring and get a helping hand, or get someone to come and do the Caesar for you or something like that. So obstetrics probably gave me my biggest worries. Anaesthetics was fairly straightforward. It's a fairly regulated thing.
It's an interesting thing, though, with anaesthetics. When you mention it, though, it's only the 1 or 2% when things go wrong that, other than that,
yes,
they'll drift off, do their thing.
Yes.
Did you have those 1%ers?
Yes, had them.
What happened?
I remember one procedure where I was giving the anaesthetic for a surgeon and this person came in. It was with a bleeding ulcer. So the surgeon went in to fix that, and it was bleeding a lot more than we'd anticipated. And I had a drip in each arm, pouring blood in, and very hard to keep the blood up to this person. And so it all came to an end, and we thought, okay, that's good, we're fine. About 4 hours later, he had a rebleed, so we had to go in and do it again. So that was a rough night, that one. But again, he survived. But you don't want those sort of things happening too often. But there are a few scary moments, but that's sort of part of anaesthetics. In many respects, that was the one procedural thing that when it did come time to sort of let it go, I found the easiest to let go, the anaesthetics. Obstetrics, again, it occurred because of some changes in government regulation that they didn't want GPs doing it in the public system. They weren't going to pay the insurance, and so we stopped doing it for a while. We weren't able to provide that service. And a lot of GPs never came back to starting it up again. So when the government realised their folly and then sort of resumed covering us for insurance, it was too late. We'd all had a sample of life without obstetrics, which was nice, not having to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning, or we're just about to go on holidays and you get a phone call. One of your patients is in labour, and so it would change the trajectory of our holiday.
Did that wear you down, having that sort of pull on your time and resources?
At the time, it was just part and parcel of life, and you accept that. But when you stop doing it, you suddenly realise the freedom that you have in not doing it, and say, well, look, how did I keep doing that? And it was just a lot better for the family, and a lot better for sleep at night.
It's an interesting thing that you've mentioned the word freedom quite a number of times, and as you evolve and as you move away from medicine, there's a lot more freedom for you. You must have been dedicated.
Well, I think that if you commit to something, and I've always believed that if I commit to anything, I want to do it to my best, and fulfil, it to my best. So, you go to work every day. I suppose the freedom that I'm sort of experiencing, I enjoy, kayaking, and I enjoy kayaking, in different parts of our local rivers and that. But I have to drive over the Mary River, over Kidd Bridge every day to go to work, and I look down to see how much water there is, and I think, gee, it's a beautiful day today. The river's got a good height. I really should be sort of, on the river at the moment. But then, that quickly passes and you go to work. So I think freedom is also about having the choice of deciding what you do when you do. Whereas, of course, when you're at work, no matter what work, it's not just medicine, whatever your work, you're committed to that, and it fills your week. And so you have, a weekend, if you have the weekends free, to do things, but usually there's the requirements there. So the freedom to actually be able to decide my destiny on a day is what I'm really referring to, and that's the exciting part that I'm looking forward to.
What's the first thing you want to do when you do stop and pull the bails and sit home and just, as you say, read a book, or what's the first big thing you want to do?
Janelle and I have planned a few holidays.
Because you're known for your most exquisite holidays.
We've been fortunate that we've had some very good holidays, including exotic places like Antarctica and the Arctic and Finland and the like. But of course, COVID has slowed us. The plan, we had a few plans to do some overseas trips, and that was one of the first things we, as a couple, were going to be doing. So we have changed that, and so we are doing some holidays around Australia. So there'll be a lot of times of just visiting the kids as well. We've got our oldest son and his family live in Canberra, so we'll venture down there pretty early in the piece and spend some time with them. And we'll, have a week or two at the coast, and we'll go to Tasmania. So we'll do that. So a lot of the time is going to be, initially, will be probably venturing around at those places. But there's always a few things that to do at home that I've been putting off for perhaps a year, perhaps 10 years, perhaps 40 years, that are going to need to be done. A lot of my photographic stuff I've got to sort of sort out, so I've been leaving that till later. So there'll be plenty to do to keep me going. And of course, I think the important thing is that I've got to make this work. Retirement's not something that just happens. You've got to actually make it work, and so I'll put the same degree of commitment into making retirement work as I have making medicine work.
I suppose a lot of people say when they have retired, they don't know how they managed to work, how they had the time.
Yeah, I do hear that a lot. It'd be interesting to see just how that plays out.
What's the best photo? You talk about Antarctica. I've seen some of your Antarctic photos. What's the best photo you've taken?
That's a tough one. I don't think I can really sort of relate to that. I think of, the thing is that the photography goes hand in hand with the place. So when I take a photograph, I know exactly where I was and what I was doing at the time I took that. So it's my help to memory. So whatever photo I have, I know when I took it and the circumstances. So there's a lot of photographs that I love because they remind me of a situation, a place, a time, people that I was with, and so on. So there's no bests. There's a lot of good ones because they do remind me of that. I've had some that I've put in competitions and things like that, and they're probably regarded as being good photographs. But
describe those.
I've taken photographs of people, and some people shots that I was in Vanuatu and took some young boys were playing, and I took some photographs of that, and that won me some awards. Those ones were regarded highly, but again, it was the circumstances. I just remember, sitting and watching these boys play and interacting with me. That picture just conjures up those memories. So that's the important part to me. I'm not a competitive person. I don't. I put these photographs in competitions because I was part of the camera club, but I have no great desire to ever sort of display my photographs. They're important to me because they remind me of places. But I'm not a competitive person, so that I don't really take photographs to win competitions. I take photographs because I enjoy the scenery, or I enjoy the experience.
What do you prefer, digital or film?
Well, I grew up using film, of course, and I used to take professional slide film, and they gave brilliant results. I am fairly critical of photography these days because they're all digitally altered. So, I mean, when you take a slide, it's a set photograph. You cannot alter it. That's it. So you've captured that moment as it is. So if there's a tree that's there that looks a bit strange or dead, it's in the photograph. Whereas nowadays, if you take a photograph digitally, you just wipe the tree out and you put a full moon in or something. I'm sort of fairly critical of that. To me, that's art, and I'm impressed by people who can do that. But it's not photography as in raw photography of, you capture that moment, you capture that person, you capture that place, and it's the picture you took at the time. I took it as it was. Now you can change it, and so you never really know whether the photograph that you see has been altered or doctored or whatever nowadays. So, but do I use digital? Yes, it's so very convenient because, but I don't go and alter my photographs a great deal. I take them digitally. Of course, the nice thing about digitally, you can take 10 of one thing and pick out the best. Whereas when I was taking slide film, it cost me $2 every time I took a photograph. So, and then you take the photograph, you have no idea what it's going to be like. You send it off to get processed. It comes back a week later, and you go through them there. There's that excitement of waiting to see what your photographs are like, and you have a look at them, and you first off, and you think, oh, I thought it was a bit different from that. And so the first time you look at them, there's a sense of not as good as I thought. You put them down, come back a couple of weeks later, and then you see them for the way they really are, and you think, that's right, that's nice.
Has that changed over the years? Now, I know when I take a photograph, I'll know whether I've captured.
Yes, you do, and that's the thing. You know now, so if it's not adequate or not right, the histogram's not right, you take it again. And so
will you take 1,000 photos to get one good one?
Probably not 1,000, but yes, I'll take line them up and try different angles and I'll take many, and then eventually you pick out one that you say that's the one. You can do that with digital, and that's the exciting part of digital. So yes, I've embraced digital, but I'm happy with the photograph that I've taken rather than changing it too much.
How was Antarctica when you went there, when you got to experience that part of the world that not a lot of people do?
Well, firstly, that was 2001, so 20 years ago now, I went there. That was when trips to Antarctica were just opening up, and so went with a group called Aurora Expeditions, and I went on a photographic and mountain climbing trip. So I was fortunate enough to, again, get onto the top of a couple of peaks, including one unclimbed peak down there in Antarctica.
Well, it must have
there.
Felt fantastic.
It did, and that was an amazing experience. But the thing about Antarctica at those days is that this was just exploring Antarctica, as a tourist was new. It had just really opened up. Nowadays, of course, there's a lot of ships take people down there. One I went on was only 50 people, and they were all sort of either climbers or photographers, and that was an exciting thing. So we had an enjoyable time. It was an experience that I'll never forget because it was just so different, such a contrast to anything else I'd ever seen, and so pristine and so quiet and so peaceful.
Compare that to then Nepal, where you're experiencing such a different culture.
Different culture, but also people everywhere. So even on the trek up to Tembuchet, where we got to on the way up to the base camp, just people all the way along the track, of all different persuasions. Some of them tourists, some of them just locals who are just walking from one village to the next. So it was all people there. So it was all about the culture as well as the scenery. So if I had a preference, I would probably go to Antarctica, because it's that remoteness and it's that quietness that I like, the escaping people. But I'm certainly very glad I experienced Nepal. It's a place. It's a very vibrant place. Kathmandu is like no other. It's a vibrant place.
Was there any desire, being a trekker and climbing mountains, was there any desire to keep going to base camp and further?
I'm very fortunate in many respects. I think that, or my family are, that I actually discovered bushwalking at a later part of my life. I started at probably around about the age of 38, 40. By which stage, I tried a bit of rock climbing and things like that, and loved it. But I just had passed that peak where I really would have been able to, put my most into it. So, because I knew that if I'd been able to, I would have found it very hard to give up. I really enjoyed that, and would have probably pursued it more actively if I'd done it from a younger age. But then again, medicine probably wouldn't have allowed it, and certainly it wouldn't have been good for my family.
Is that part of what you do, how you approach things, that you're very committed to whatever you do?
Yeah, there's a real, as I said before, if I do something, I like to do it to the best. It's got to be finished. It's got to be done to the best that I can. That's always been the case. I think I would have pursued it to, and I think people who do, who are good at their sporting activities and things like that, they're almost married to it. You've got to have that degree of passion to actually be able to do those sort of things. So I've been lucky that I've tried lots of different adventure things, and delved in it and enjoyed being exposed to it, but never being able to being able to take it to the extreme. So the bushwalking came, I'd be able to do a trek, about every second year or something like that. If I did some rock climbing, it was sort of, with a group, and we'd do it, on a weekend that I had spare rather than sort of every weekend. I'd like to try things. I like to tick boxes, and try things. I've tried a bit of caving, and I've tried a bit of abseiling, and I've even jumped out of an aeroplane with a parachute. I like to try these adventure sort of things to sort of see what they're about, but you can't pursue them all. But I've been lucky enough to try these things. Tried skiing, snow skiing, love that. But again, you can only do that once every couple of years as well. So I've had a very fortunate life, in that medicine's given me probably the financial sort of freedom to be able to pursue some of these things as well, and to be able to share some of these holidays with our families, take our families to holidays that have been exceptional. So that's one of the privileges, I think, of also having done medicine.
Are there any boxes yet to tick?
Well, there's still a lot of the world I haven't seen, so I would like to sort of tick the boxes of visiting a lot more places.
What stands out? Where would you like to go?
We haven't been to Africa, We have been to Morocco, but we haven't been to Africa as such. And that was on our short list this year. Sorry, not this year, next year, 2021. But that's not going to happen. So I definitely want to go and spend some time in Africa. That's a totally different experience to anything we've experienced before. I'd also like to sort of do some more up in Norway, Finland, and the like, and Russia. We actually had a trip planned to Russia, for this September this year, but of course that was cancelled as a result of COVID. So we'll do that some other time. So
why Russia?
Just again, it's a different place, different culture. Again, there's some nice remote areas in Russia as well that I'd be very keen to see. So just because I haven't seen that part of the world.
As you look back now and reflect on 40 years as a GP, what's the one thing that stands out for you?
I'd have to really think about that. I think the thing that stands out is that it's probably the privilege of just being part of people's lives, and that every day there would be examples of times when you were included in something that you felt was very special. So I'd have to count those opportunities of being part of people's lives, whether it be with newborns, or whether it be helping a person leave this world as they were dying, and that there's opportunities where you're included in their lives, and it's very personal, and it's very raw sometimes, but it's an opportunity that not everybody has, and I've always enjoyed that. So they're probably the standout moments. If I really think about it more than anything else, it's just the many opportunities I've had to be part of people's very intimate life.
Well, I'm sure from many people, thanks are in order, and congratulations on 40 years of commitment to medicine and your patients, and enjoy retirement.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Rod Day, thanks for joining us over the bonnet.
Thank you.